The bustling neon streets of New Etheris hummed with life as humans and aliens coexisted in uneasy harmony. Merchants shouted their wares, air taxis zipped overhead, and a scent of exotic spices mixed with the city's electric hum. It was a place where interstellar cultures collided, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. Ronan stepped through the crowded marketplace, his worn leather jacket shielding him from the evening chill. He had always been fascinated by alien cultures, but tonight, all he wanted was a quiet drink. His job as a translator for the Intergalactic Council paid well, but it often put him in tense situations. Then, a sudden commotion. A figure darted past him, hood drawn low, bumping into his shoulder. "Sorry," a soft, breathless voice murmured. Before Ronan could react, a group of armored enforcers pushed through the crowd. "Did you see a Thalvian female run this way?" one demanded, his deep violet eyes glowing under his helmet. Ronan hesitated. He wasn't one to get involved in alien affairs. But something about the stranger's hurried steps and the panic in her voice made him say, "No, didn't see anyone." The enforcer narrowed his eyes but moved on, vanishing into the sea of bodies. A moment later, a delicate hand grasped his wrist, pulling him into a dark alley. The hooded stranger removed her cloak, revealing deep sapphire skin and a cascade of shimmering silver hair. Her eyes, like molten gold, searched his face with urgency. "You covered for me," she whispered.
"Why?"
Ronan shrugged. "Seemed like you needed it." She hesitated, then exhaled. "My name is Silnara, and I need your help." Ronan studied Silnara in the dim alley. Her sapphire skin gleamed under the flickering neon signs, and her golden eyes flickered with unease. "You need my help?" he asked, glancing back toward the bustling marketplace where the enforcers had disappeared. "Why are they after you?" She pulled her cloak tighter around herself. "It's complicated," Ronan sighed. "Of course it is." He wasn't one to jump into trouble, but something about Silnara made him pause. Maybe it was her desperation. Maybe it was those strange, glowing eyes.
"Fine.
But let's get off the streets first." He led her through a maze of back alleys, avoiding security drones and patrols. The city's lower districts were a mix of human and alien influence, filled with dimly lit bars, old Earth-style diners, and towering structures of iridescent metal. Eventually, they reached his small apartment, a cluttered but comfortable space overlooking the neon skyline. Ronan locked the door behind them and turned to Silnara. "All right," he said. "Start talking?" She hesitated, then finally spoke. "I am of noble blood. A Thalvian princess." Ronan groaned. "Of course you are. My people have strict traditions," she continued. "I was to be married off to form an alliance. But I refused. I ran away." Ronan folded his arms. "And now they want you back." "Not just back," Silnara said, voice tight. "If they find me, they will force the marriage or execute me for dishonoring my clan." Ronan ran a hand through his hair. "Great. So now I'm hiding a runaway alien princess. That won't get me killed or anything." She stepped closer. "I had no choice but to run. And I had no one else to turn to." Ronan sighed again. "All right. You can stay here for now. Just." A sudden crack echoed through the room. Ronan turned just in time to see Silnara stumble. The loose clasp on her cloak had slipped, and the fabric slid from her shoulders. And then he saw her. Not just her face, not just her hands, but all of her. The deep sapphire hue of her skin, the graceful markings that traced along her collarbone and down her arms, the way she instinctively moved to cover herself with wide, horrified eyes. Silence. Then, "You saw me," she whispered, voice barely audible. Ronan blinked, confused.
Yeah."
Her hands trembled. "Oh no. No, no, no." She backed up against the wall. "You've seen me unclothed, human. Do you have any idea what that means?" Ronan raised his hands. "Look, it was an accident. I wasn't trying to." She grabbed his collar, eyes wild. "In my culture, if a man sees a noble woman like this, there are only two options." Ronan's stomach dropped. "And those are?" Her voice shook. "Marriage or death." Silence stretched between them. Then Ronan groaned, rubbing his temples. You've got to be kidding me. Ronan stared at Silnara, his mind racing. Marriage or death? There was no way she was serious. You're joking, he said, voice flat. Silnara shook her head frantically. I wish I were. She began pacing, her silver hair shimmering under the dim light. Thalvian noble laws are strict. A woman's markings, she gestured to the delicate patterns on her skin, are only meant to be seen by family or a bonded mate. You, a human, have seen mine. Ronan dragged a hand down his face. So what? Just tell them it was an accident. Her golden eyes darkened. It doesn't matter. If my people find out, they will demand reparation. They will either force us into marriage or execute us both to preserve honor. Ronan let out a short laugh, half in disbelief. That's insane. Silnara crossed her arms. That's Thalvian law. He sighed, leaning against the wall. Okay, let's think about this logically. If I just help you escape the planet, she cut him off. They'll find me eventually. The only way to guarantee my safety is to give them a reason to stop chasing me. Ronan frowned. And that reason is marrying me? A long silence stretched between them. Silnara finally spoke, voice reluctant. Yes. Ronan let out a humorless chuckle. So what? We just have a quick ceremony, say I do, and your people magically forget about killing us? She hesitated. Not exactly. Ronan raised an eyebrow. Why do I feel like I'm not gonna like this answer? She took a deep breath. A Thalvian marriage isn't just words. It's a bond. A real, physical connection. Our people link minds and emotions. It's how we ensure loyalty. Ronan's stomach twisted. You're saying if we do this, I won't just be pretending to be your husband. I'll actually be your husband? She nodded, eyes locked onto his. For life. He exhaled sharply. Great. Just great. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ronan looked at her. And if I refuse? Silnara's face grew pale. Then the enforcers will come. They'll assume you defiled me and demand justice. She swallowed hard. They will kill us both. Ronan clenched his jaw. He had gotten into plenty of messes before, but this was on another level. Then he looked at her, really looked at her. She was terrified, trapped in a nightmare of her own making. She wasn't asking for this any more than he was. He sighed. If we do this, you'll be safe? She nodded. He rubbed the back of his neck. And what happens if I say yes? Do we have to consummate it? Silnara's face flushed a deep violet. And no, the bond is mental, not physical. That part is optional. Ronan let out a relieved breath. Well, that's something. Another silence stretched between them before Silnara finally whispered, Ronan, I know this isn't fair, but I don't want to die. And I don't want you to die either. He studied her, then exhaled. Well, guess I'd better figure out where to get a suit. Silnara blinked. You mean? Ronan sighed. Yeah. Let's get married. Ronan had never imagined his day would end with him preparing for an intergalactic wedding. Yet here he was, standing in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of a ceremonial Thalvian robe that felt too tight around his neck. The deep silver fabric shimmered in the light, its patterns shifting like liquid metal. Apparently, it was woven with microscopic energy threads that reacted to movement. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Silnara, dressed in an elegant sapphire gown that matched her skin, stood nearby, watching him through the mirror's reflection. It's tradition, she said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced herself. Ronan turned to her. So, what exactly happens during the ceremony? She hesitated before answering. The bonding ritual is simple. We stand before the officiator, recite the vows, and at the end, she trailed off, looking away. Ronan narrowed his eyes. At the end what? Her fingers tightened around the fabric of her dress. We touch foreheads. That's what seals the bond. Ronan blinked. That's it. She nodded. It's a mental link, remember? Physical contact triggers the connection. Ronan exhaled. All right. Could be worse. Just then, the door slid open, and an elderly Thalvian man stepped inside. His violet robes indicated his status as an officiator, and his deep golden eyes held wisdom and scrutiny. "I am Viatheres," the elder said. "Are you both prepared?" Ronan exchanged a glance with Silnara before nodding. "As ready as I'll ever be." The elder gestured toward the ceremonial platform. The room was adorned with floating lights that pulsed in rhythm, a silent choir of energy that seemed to hum in anticipation. Silnara stepped forward first, her movements graceful, though Ronan could tell she was nervous. He followed, standing beside her as Vitheres raised his hands. "We gather here to witness the union of two souls, bound by fate and necessity," the officiator intoned. "Silnara, daughter of the House of Althera, and Ronan, son of Earth, do you come willingly?" Silnara swallowed hard. "I do." Ronan hesitated before answering.
Yeah.
"I do." The elder nodded. "Then let the bond be sealed." Silnara turned to him, eyes searching his face. "This is it," she whispered. Ronan exhaled, then leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. The moment they touched, his mind exploded. A rush of emotions flooded his senses: Silnara's fear, her relief, her exhaustion. For a brief moment, he saw flashes of her memories: a grand palace with silver towers, a father's stern gaze, the feeling of suffocation under the weight of duty. And then warmth. A strange, electric sensation that wasn't unpleasant but felt right. When they pulled apart, Silnara's breathing was uneven. "It's done," she murmured. Viatheres nodded. "You are now bonded." Ronan rubbed his temples, still feeling the strange connection humming beneath his skin. "So, now what?" Silnara turned to him, her golden eyes filled with something unreadable. "Now we face my people. Together." Ronan expected a grand announcement. Maybe a parade. At the very least, a formal declaration that he and Silnara were now officially married and no longer in danger. Instead, they were immediately summoned to the Thalvian High Council. "This is going to be a disaster," Ronan muttered as they stepped into the towering crystalline hall. The room was massive, its ceiling shimmering with floating light orbs that cast an eerie glow. At the center, a half-circle of Thalvian nobles sat on ornate silver thrones, their golden eyes sharp and unreadable. Silnara walked beside him, her posture rigid. "Let me do the talking," she whispered. Ronan wasn't about to argue. At the head of the council sat an older Thalvian man, his skin the same deep sapphire as Silnara's, his silver hair streaked with age. His gaze was cold as he studied them. "Silnara," he said, voice like steel, "you bring shame to your house." She flinched but held her ground. "Father," she replied evenly. Ronan tensed. "Oh, great. It's her dad." Lord Valthera's gaze flicked to Ronan. "And you are the human." Ronan gave a tight nod. "Nice to meet you too." A murmur rippled through the council at his casual tone, but Valthera remained expressionless. "You dishonor our ways, Silnara. You fled your duty. And now, you claim a human as your mate." Ronan bristled. "I didn't exactly plan this either, you know." A sharp glance from Silnara told him to shut up. She lifted her chin. "We are bonded now. It is done." Another murmur spread through the chamber. One of the council members, a woman with piercing violet eyes, leaned forward. "You understand the implications of this, child? A bonding cannot be undone." "I understand," Silnara said, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. Lord Valthera's expression darkened. "Then you understand that you have brought an outsider into our bloodline." Ronan finally spoke up. "All right, I get it. I'm not what you wanted." But Silnara didn't choose this situation, and neither did I. "We're just dealing with the mess that your laws created." The room fell silent. A few council members exchanged glances. Valthera's gaze remained locked onto Ronan, unreadable. Then slowly he leaned forward. "If you are truly bonded," he said, voice dangerously calm, "then prove it." Ronan frowned. "Prove it how?" A small, almost cruel smile touched the older man's lips. "A bond is more than ceremony. It is connection. You should feel her emotions. Anticipate her thoughts. If you are truly one, You will know what she is thinking. Silnara stiffened beside him. Ronan could feel it. Her pulse quickened, her nerves creeping through his own mind. He exhaled. All right, think. Think like her. He turned to Silnara, meeting her golden gaze.
What is she thinking right now?
His mind flashed with an image, her heart pounding, the fear of failure, the desperate hope that he could somehow understand. Without thinking, Ronan reached out and took her hand. She gasped softly, eyes widening. He turned back to the council. She's thinking that if we fail this test, you'll tear us apart.
His voice was steady.
And she's afraid. Silence. The council members exchanged unreadable glances. Then, Valthera leaned back in his throne. The bond is real, he said finally. But that does not mean I approve. Silnara let out a shaky breath. So, what happens now? Valthera's expression remained unreadable. You have chosen your path. You will remain bonded. But do not expect acceptance so easily. Ronan frowned. And what about the enforcers? The ones who were hunting her? Valthera's jaw tightened. They will be recalled. Your lives are no longer in danger. But know this, if you betray this union in any way, there will be consequences. Ronan met his gaze evenly. Noted. The council remained silent for a long moment before one of the nobles finally spoke. Then it is settled. Silnara's fingers tightened around Ronan's. It was over. They were safe.
For now.
The walk back from the council chamber was silent. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on them both. The bond had been accepted, the enforcers would stand down, and they were officially safe. And yet, Ronan stole a glance at Silnara. Her fingers still trembled slightly in his grasp, though she kept her face composed. The golden glow of her eyes flickered under the dim corridor lights, but she didn't say a word. When they reached the apartment, she finally spoke. It's over, she murmured, almost to herself. Ronan let out a slow breath, leaning against the wall.
Yeah.
She turned to face him, studying his expression. Do you regret it? He blinked. Regret what? She gestured between them.
This. The bond.
Being tied to me. Ronan thought for a moment. Objectively, his life had just taken the sharpest left turn imaginable. He had gone from being a simple translator to being married to a runaway alien princess in less than 24 hours. But when he looked at Silnara, really looked at her, he didn't feel regret. He felt something else entirely. I don't know, he admitted. But I don't think so. Silnara's lips parted slightly, surprise flashing across her face. You mean that? Ronan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I won't lie. This is crazy. I didn't wake up today expecting to get married. He exhaled. But I meant what I said in there. You didn't choose this. Neither did I. But here we are. Her gaze softened. Here we are. A silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Then Silnara took a slow step forward. There's something you should know, she murmured. Ronan raised an eyebrow. Something worse than everything else? A small smile tugged at her lips. No, not worse. She hesitated. When a bond is formed, it isn't just a legal tie. Over time, it grows. The connection strengthens. We become more attuned to each other. Thoughts, feelings, eventually, it will become second nature.
Ronan processed that.
So you're saying one day, I'll be able to read your mind? She laughed softly. Not exactly. But you'll understand me in a way no one else can. Something warm settled in Ronan's chest at that thought. The idea of knowing Silnara, not just in words, but in ways no one else ever could, felt strangely intimate. And for the first time since this all started, he didn't feel trapped. He felt curious. So, he said, smirking, what happens now? Do I start getting weird alien cravings? Waking up in the middle of the night craving Thalvian space soup? Silnara rolled her eyes, but the corners of her lips twitched upward. No, but you will start sensing my emotions whether you like it or not. Ronan groaned. Great. So if you're mad at me, I won't even be able to pretend I don't notice? Exactly. Ronan chuckled. Sounds exhausting. Silnara tilted her head. You'll get used to it. A beat of silence passed before she added, softly, and so will I. Ronan met her gaze, and for the first time since this whole mess began, he saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear. It was hope. He didn't know what their future looked like, didn't know what it meant to be bound to someone from an entirely different world. But as he looked at Silnara, he realized something. He didn't mind figuring it out.
Together.